is one of our monthly presentations from the Historical Society. This month's presentation is on the local connections to the Civil War. It's being presented by Hal Myers and Mark Myers. They have relatives that were in the Civil War. They have a lot of pictures and memorabilia here. On this side I brought a rifle that's to the period of the Civil War, just a little after the Civil War. The Civil War bullets are here, the bayonets are here, and coins from the years of the Civil War are all down in this case here. There are several books here that we're going to have in our library, and this old 1860s photograph on tin. It's I think they call it a daguerreotype, and I don't know if it's gold, but that's an original. Couple of things you want to know about the Civil War that I can tell you that he might not tell you. When they were marching in the Civil War, they did not have right shoes and left shoes. They only had shoes one way. There was no left foot or right foot. It didn't matter what shoe they put on what foot, because they didn't have right foot and left foot. And one of the other things, they all liked to play poker. They all were playing cards, and their cards did not have numbers on them. There were no numbers on the cards during the Civil War. There were 9 hearts or 9 clubs on the card, but there was no number 9, no number 6. So that's some of the things, if you're a collector and you want to go back and buy a set of cards and you see it with no numbers on it, you'll know it's from that time period. Okay, with that being said, we have a Confederate flag on this side, we have an American flag on this side, so I'd like to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And with that being said, I present Hal Myers, who's going to give our presentation. Big round of applause for Hal.
Now my cousin here told me that this is not going to be boring. I only got 30 minutes, so I'll try to make it quick. You know, are you going to time me?
I'm not worried about you.
Oh, Bruce is going to.
I'll time you. I have a stand dial.
As they said, my name's Hal Myers. I was born and raised in Scranton. I'm one of 11 children. My father was George Myers. His father was actually from Jermyn. His mother was from Mayfield. But my grandfather George was actually born in Scott Township. This is where my grandfather Henry come from. I'll give you a little background history and how it all happened and some of the tragedy that took place in between. One of the unique things about the family was that my grandfather, great-great-grandfather Peter Myers, was from Columbia County, New York. He was born in Glattonville there. He was a cooper, and it got to a point where he was running out of any kind of wood, because during the time there in the Hudson Valley area, wood became very scarce. So somehow or another, he managed to come west, and he came and settled here at first in Carbondale in between 1830 and 1835. He then bought a 1,000-acre farm in Scott Township. And he bought that farm basically because he needed the wood. And I have been up there, and there is a deal of oak up there, and there's all kinds of walnut. And so this is what he needed the area for. So they settled here. And when he came west, he had 4 children with him. 1 girl, 3 boys. Two of the boys, one was my grandfather, one was Mark. And before he came, there was another grandfather that came, and his name was Daniel Raymond Green. And he settled in what was Greenfield. So somehow or another, I don't know how it happened. Of course, I don't know, I never really found out and never asked. But my grandfather Miles married Priscilla Green, his daughter. Sylvester married Myra Green, and my Aunt Elizabeth married Jonathan Green, all out of the same family. Jonathan Green and Elizabeth Green stayed in Scott Township a while, and then of course they moved on to Scranton, and they lived in Scranton until their last days. Of course, Sylvester and Milo stayed there. Now, Sylvester was a cooper, and he worked for his dad on the farm there. So then it came to a point where everything was going along real well when my poor grandfather, Peter Myers, in September of 1861, passed away. When he did, he left the farm to my grandmother, Sarah, and of course the boys. Well, everything was going along really well then, and they were doing all right, but then of course they were missing my father, so Anthony Myers, one of my uncles, was Sylvester and Milo's brother. He joins in 1862, September of 1862, he joined the Company K-17 Pennsylvania Cavalry, and he served throughout the war. He went from 1862 all the way to 1865 and was just about every major battle ever fought in the Civil War. And he managed to get out of there without ever getting a scratch. So from the time he left till the time he come back, he never come back home. Because as I checked all his records, he never took a furlough, he never took nothing, he never come home. And before he left, all he was a farm labor. Then things got kind of rough, I guess, somewhere along the line. December of 1863, my grandmother, Priscilla Green, died, leaving my grandfather, Milo, with 5 children. So the only thing he could do with the children was to take them to his mother, Sarah, on the farm. Now you gotta remember, at this time, Sarah's up in age now, she's about 60 years old. So now he's gonna turn these children over to her to take care of. So once that happened, things were going along pretty good, and I guess somewhere along the time, some things got a little tight, and it got a little rough for the whole family, so they had to decide what they were gonna do. Well, they had 1,000 acres of land. The only one that was there that could provide a living for them was Sylvester, my grandfather. He was a farm laborer. He just worked around at different farms, and the only other person that could help him was Sylvester. He was a cooper. So I guess at that time then, Sylvester, being a cooper, he brought his family in there, so then there was the 5 children from my grandfather Milo plus their children. Now, from my understanding was that they had a large house. They had a big house, and then they had another area out not too far from it. And I've been up there years ago when I seen the places, and one was kind of a living quarters and a workshop. And so now they had to decide what they were going to do because things were getting a little tight. Now you're in a couple of years into the Civil War. You know, things were getting more expensive, and it wasn't very easy when you had all the children thing. So my grandfather Milo and his brother Sylvester decided, well, the best thing for them to do was to join the Civil War. Now, when you have a family and you have kids, and you take somebody like Milo that had 5 children, Sylvester that had his own 5 children, plus when he married Sarah, she had some children that was there with him. So the thing about it is, you know, you're going to go off and you're going to leave them, and now they're getting to the height of the Civil War when it's really getting bad. I mean, now it's really getting into bigger, major battles. So you think to yourself why they did it. Well, what most people don't realize is that 1862, what came along was the bounty. And what a bounty was when a man joined in the Civil War, they paid you $300. In some cases, and you'll find probably many men in the upper parts of the region here, Susquehanna County, Sullivan County, Bradford County, used to go over the border and join the New York regiments because they gave a $700 bonus. And there was many of them that did it. Well, now the thing about it is, don't think to yourself that oh, well, okay, I'm gonna go in here, you're gonna give me $300? No, it wasn't the way it worked. What happened when you went in there was they only paid you a certain percentage, and then the next was given to you over a period of time in your pay. And the sad thing about an enlisted man in the Civil War was that your pay just didn't come every month like they told you. You got paid once a month, and your pay was $13. And that's all the money that you got. Now, the thing about it is you can go 3 or 4 months before you got a paycheck. The only ones that are ever paid right down in a month was officers. Well, why do you think an officer got paid? Simply because he's an officer? Nah, that wasn't so. And the same thing that exists then exists today. An officer in the Civil War, when he went in there, he had to buy his own uniform, he had to get his own food, he had to get his own equipment, he had to buy his own weapons. The government didn't supply him anything but a paycheck. That's all they gave him. So when he went up there, when everybody else was being fed, he had to go buy his own food. So that's the reason why that they had to pay them every month to make sure those officers. Otherwise, officers would be going around begging off their living, you know. And personally, between me and you, I don't think most officers like hardtack and coffee. Hardtack was a terrible thing. You know, you could put that in your mouth on Monday and you could still have it the next Monday. and trust me, this is true. And there was a fellow who died a couple years ago. He used to make hardtack and he'd bring it to us. And it is the truth. You could put that in your mouth and you could sit there all day. It was nothing but flour and water. That's all it was. But that thing would get so hard, you could drive a nail in it. So you'd put it in your mouth and you let it melt. So that's the thing is that if a soldier was along and he seen an officer and that officer was hungry, he said, here, I'll give you a piece of hardtack. Never mind. I'll go find a chicken or something. Or he would find one of his men, if he was a high-ranking officer or company commander or something, go out and find me a chicken, find me something to eat. You know. So this is what it became when it became. So the most that my grandmother, taking care of my grandfather's 5 children, would get would be his pay. So the thing about it is at that time, most people weren't educated. You know, very, very few people had educated, especially those people who lived out there like they did in the mountains and places like that. And there's very few. My grandfather, my Uncle Sylvester, the only one that I really knew was my Uncle Anthony. My grandmother, none of them could write, and they couldn't read. So now you say to yourself, well, how in the world did they ever survive? You know, the thing about it is, how did they get the pay from there to home, or how did they do it? Well, the thing about it is if you had a buddy that could read or write, you'd say, hey, would you put this in an envelope and send it home for me? You know, right? I'll tell you what to write, and you write it. You know, that's a heck now. The thing about it is now when you get it home, well, let's suppose something when you're at home happens, you got to go get somebody to do the same thing because you can't read or write. And majority of the people that was there at the time, even Sarah and Margaret Green, couldn't help her because she didn't know how to read or write either. So it was really difficult. So during the time that before they went away, Milo and Sylvester and Sarah got together, their mother, and they decided to sell some of their land. So they sold 460 acres of land to their neighbor, not too far from them, Nancy and John Skull. So the boys go off to war. Now mom's there left with the children, Sarah's left with her children, and they go off. They went off on March the 22nd of 1864. They went to Harrisburg, they spent 1 month in Harrisburg, then they were shipped to South Carolina. When they got to South Carolina, they went to Folly Island. So during the time they were on Folly Island, now when you've sent these soldiers down south, especially South Carolina, Georgia, any of those, Virginia, any of those places like that, their chances of getting sick was very good. It was about 99% sure you're going to get something. If it wasn't malaria, you get some other kind of disease, cholera, typhoid, whatever it may be, you would get some kind of a disease. You know, don't know whatever happened to my Uncle Sylvester. Well, Sylvester went to Folly Island, and they were there, and this was a staging area for all the Union forces that were going to be doing battle in the South. And then they had 3 of them, Folly Island, Morris Island, and then they had Fort Monroe. Well, the thing about it was that they were down there because they were planning this big battle. Anywhere, somewhere along the line, poor Uncle Sylvester developed something. So he got sick. So the next thing you know, they ship him off to Fort Morris. He was at Fort Morris for a while, then he goes to Fort Monroe. Stays there a couple of weeks and he come back. Still couldn't function. He picked up something, they don't know what it was. They have no idea. It doesn't even mention in the records. All it mentions in his record is 2 weeks here at Fort Monroe, 2 weeks here at Morris Island, 2 weeks here at Folly Island. So he was fortunate in a way, because then shortly after that, my grandfather Milo was taken from Folly Island down to Morris Island. And he was there at Morris Island while all of these other forces were coming in by boat, because now they were making these plans to make an attack on what they call Johnson Island. And it was in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Well, lo and behold, as one would have it, Uncle Sylvester, he's doing all right because he's in the hospital. Now you gotta remember, he didn't know how to read or write now. I mean, he understands that they're gonna be taking an attack. So they get these boats, they take these, my grandfather and my Uncle Sylvester belonged to the 52nd PA Infantry in Company F. And you know, the funny thing about Company F is Uncle Sylvester had a stepson named Harrison Mott. Harrison Mott was 15 years old and he joined the 52nd, and he also was in Company F. So he was probably there at the time. Whether Harrison could write or not, I have no idea. You know, in any of the census records I read about it, there wasn't anything that applied that he could read or he couldn't read, or he could write or he couldn't write. But anyhow, the way the situation worked out was, it was on July the 3rd of 1864. They load up these boats and now they're going to go attack this fort. And my grandfather and Harrison Mott were both on the same boat. So Sylvester, he packed it, Morris Island. He's sick. So now the attack is all planned. Now they're ready to go and they're going to put these bunch of men all in rowboats. They're going to go in and they're going to make an amphibious landing onto the beach, go up and take this fort. Well, somebody miscalculated. So there was a number of boats that went. While them boats were out there, another load of boats supposed to come behind them. So in the meantime, the tide goes out. So once the tide come out, those boats that went forward to the island were all stuck on the sand. They couldn't move. So there was 125 men in those boats, couldn't go nowhere. And about 300 or 400 yards ahead of them was a bunch of Confederates in the fort, about 1,800 of them, that these men are going to have to fight against. And they had no choice but to fight or just give up and just sit there. There was no way that they could get any help, because as hard as they tried to get boats through, they couldn't get no boats through, because any boat they sent just got stuck on the sand. So they decided, all right, what we'll do is we'll fight our way out of here. So they took off for the fort. Well, of course, it didn't work out so good. A number of them got killed, and the majority of them got captured. So my father was one of them, and so was Harrison Mott, one of them. So off they went, they became prisoners of war. Now they're taken to the Charleston racetrack, which is a temporary prison, a war camp. Now, I don't know if you ever heard about soldiers got captured in the Civil War. And sometimes you might think to yourself, oh, boy, this is fantastic. I got captured, so now I'm out of the war, I don't have to worry about it. Well, more men that went captured and went into rebel prisons never come out. You take one prison, for instance, Andersonville, one of the most dreaded prisons of all. 33,000 Union troops was put into that prison. And you got to remember, when it first started out and was first built, it was only meant to hold 10,000. And they had to keep expanding and expanding and expanding. It had a creek that run right through the middle of the fort. This was where the men were supposed to get their drinking water. But that drinking water became so polluted that they couldn't even drink. They had men in that camp burrow down in the ground to keep themselves warm. The only kind of food they would ever get was parched corn and some water. And maybe if they were lucky with the corn, they got a little piece of bacon or maybe a little piece of beef, but not enough to sustain yourself for a whole day. Then the rebels decided, well, we'll come along, we'll give you rations. So now they start rationing it out. So now what they do is they said, okay, we'll give you enough for a week. But it's up to you to make sure that at the end of the week you have food, but we're not going to give you any. So out of the 33,000 men that eventually went into Andersonville, 13,000 died from all kinds of diseases, starvation, dysentery, you name it. And the one thing that really hurt them bad was they never had a vegetable. You know, can you imagine yourself being in there for years and getting out and just seeing a carrot, what you must have done? Or if you even seen an onion or a piece of beef. Just imagine what you would think to yourself. But you know the sad part about it is, some of those men who did get out, and they did that, they wound up dying. You know why they died? They stuffed themselves so much that it killed them. And it happened to a lot of men. There were so many men, there was so many men, just imagine this. You're 18 years old and you go into a prison, right? They capture you in 1862, you don't get out till after 1865. Or if you're lucky, they might exchange you, but they didn't do that. General Grant comes along when he takes over and he says, no more exchanges. Because when we exchange and you turn the rebels loose, they go right back and join the army. We ain't gonna do that no more. So those poor soldiers that were in those prisons had to stay there. So when he got out, there was one prisoner I read about in the book that I have on Andersonville. He was 18 years old. He managed to survive just by going around and picking up what he could from here and there, what little bitty pieces of clothes he could find to put on. You know, sometimes, you know, anything, just some little piece of rag or something you could put around yourself, just something to keep warm. You know, it was just terrible conditions. You just can't imagine. You're talking about people that are just back to back, side to side, head to head. There was nowhere for you to lay down. There was anything. And then there were people who would come along that maybe were healthier or better off than you, would come along and throw you out and take your place, or take your food, or take whatever they could, take your clothing. And when if you're a new prisoner and you went in that camp, chances are, they take buttons off you so they can take those buttons, just like these. Just rip it off the uniform, just hold on to it. Because you know, that was something to barter with. Just that one little gold button. Hey, I can get me a potato with that. You know? So now this boy, he gets out. He didn't get exchanged, but he was turned loose when they found out that Jermyn was coming towards that camp. They decided, well, we're going to ship these guys out. We're going to let them go. So this 18-year-old boy is let go. So he was from Philadelphia, and he goes home. So when he goes home, he walks up to his mother's house and knocks on the door. She run him off. She didn't know who he was. She run him completely out. She said, I don't know you. You're not my son. Get out of here. So these are the kind of things that men faced in the Civil War, especially when he went to prison, because that's how bad prison was. It probably turned that 18-year-old boy into a 35 or 65-year-old man that his mother didn't even recognize him. But at any rate, back to my grandfather. So my grandfather goes to the racetrack. They keep him there for a while. Now they ship him to the Florence Stockade. The Florence Stockade was also in South Carolina, and also another prison that was overcrowded. So he goes to the prison, and he was there. So he goes to the prison in July, and he stays there until November. When on November the 18th of 1864, he died in the prison hospital. But the sad thing about my grandfather was going through all that he went through, and then being there in prison and realizing that was a death sentence. He probably knew he was never going to get out of there. He probably realized it because out of every 5 men or 6 men that went to a prison, maybe only one would come out, if he was lucky. That's how bad conditions were and how bad it was to be in a prisoner of war camp. But anyway, my grandfather died. So when my grandfather died, of course, Harry Mott was there with him, so he stays with them. So the only way now, here he got his brother is over in Morris Island sick. His mother's at home, he can't write it, he can't write, he can't tell her. So now Harrison gets out of that prison in 1864. He finally gets exchanged and he goes home. So he goes home and he tells his grandmother. He said, I hate to tell you this, but he said, your son Milo's not coming home. He died in prison. Well, Now my grandmother's stuck. What are you gonna do? She got 5 children. Now the other sad point about my grandfather being there was in between the time that he signed up and the time that he went down and went to battle, his oldest son, John Warren Myers, died. Chances are my grandfather never even knew his son passed away. Probably never even knew he died. And you know, to this day, still can't find John's grave, don't know where John Warren, don't know what they did with him. You know, the funny thing is, you go up to Scott Valley Cemetery, there's only 2 people in there we can find that was out of our family. That was my Uncle Anthony, who was in the 17th Pennsylvania, and my grandfather. All the other people here died in Scott Township, we can't find them. Well, I did find Priscilla, my grandmother. She was up in the Clifford Cemetery. But the sad part about it is, now here you are, so now what do? You know, so now it comes along, and the only person home with her now is, now Anthony gets out in 1865. Sylvester, he makes it on through the war because he spent most of his time in hospital. He comes home. Now once he gets home, now he still has problems. He's having a hard time making a living. You know, his arms don't work right, his legs don't work. You know, his back hurts him all the time. He's got these fevers all the time, so he's trying his best to make a living. So they leave the farm and they go to Springville, up in Susquehanna County. And they have a farm up there. Well, I don't think Sylvester did much farming. Sylvester was a cooper. He couldn't even do that job because he wasn't able. The thing about it was, is what the war did to him. You know, but he wasn't in war. He was just there. Somehow or another he picked something up. But the poor man couldn't do anything. They had all these children to take care of. And the thing about it, he went on and on. And he was like that up until the day he died in 1885. The thing about it is that now Sarah, on the other hand, had another problem. She had to have money to live on. Now, if you ever read a census, you ever see on the census where it says, if you go back 1840, 1850, 1860, you go back in them census, they'll always list out there in a family, if you got money, they'll list it. If you got any kind of money, if you got $6, $2, $3, whatever, they'll put it on it. Well, funny thing about it is that they're looking at all of Sarah's censuses up to 1870, she had money. She was doing good. 1870, no money. And the only person living with her at that time was their younger son, John. And John had a wife, Susan. Now, I don't know how long John hung around. John, he was a farm laborer. They didn't have a farm up there. They had a farm for lumber because it was for making barrels and shingles. It wasn't for any kind of enough land up there to do any kind of farming. I'm able to sustain yourself for a little bit. So now it comes down to the fact is that what do? So now she applies for a pension. So when she applied for the pension, because her son had died and she had to want the pension for the children, not for her. Well, she applied for that pension in 1870. She didn't get a dime from the government. It took her this long. She didn't get a dime from the government until 1877. Now you gotta remember, these children are getting old. You know, as time goes on, you know, they're going 14, 15, 16. So now when they reach the age of 16, the government stopped paying. So all she was getting for the 4 children she was taking care of was $2 a month for each one. That's all. And she couldn't get that pension. She had to go get somebody that would act as a children's guardian, but because she was a woman, she couldn't do it. So now she had to go out and find somebody, and she did find a man that lived close to their property. His name was M.L. Miller. Mr. Miller put up a $1,000 bond to become the guardian to those children. Now, and then after that, all these affidavits had to be wrote. They had to prove his wife was dead. They had to prove this. They had to prove that. You had to go through a whole hassle. If you ever thought to yourself that any man that applied for a pension that was in the service, you know, no matter what it was, if his parents, his wife, or anybody, if you think you get it just like that, you don't. It takes you years. Sometimes it might take up to, I think my Aunt Sarah Meyer Green, I don't think she got a pension until 1904. And it was fortunate enough she lived that long. But the fact of the matter is, that's the way it was. And that's how it went. So anyway, what happened was she eventually got a pension. So then home there with her now is just, and during the 70s, my great-grandfather was there with her. And my Uncle John was for a little while, then he left. Then the only ones that was left were just Milo's 4 children. So my great-grandfather, Henry Myers, he more or less took over and he was taking care of the farm. So somewhere along the line then, I guess either my grandmother or my grandfather, one or another, he got married with a girl from up in Wayne County. And they got married, and my grandfather, George Myers, was born there. And he was born there in January of 1880. So when he became 3 months old, they decided then they're getting out of there. So my grandmother Sarah, Henry, Lillian, they all packed up and they moved to Jermyn. So they came here in the early part of 1780 and settled here in Jermyn and lived in a house on Bacon Street. They lived in that house until the early 1900s when they left. And then when they left here, they went to, now my grandfather, you know, he stayed here. They lived here, he worked here, he went to school here. Matter of fact, he went to Jermyn High School. Him and his sister, Alta, well, there was more children born out to Henry and him. So his sister, Alta, and him graduated in 1899 from the Jermyn High School. Do any of you remember the Jermyn High School? I've seen pictures of it, but I never seen it for real. I didn't, you know, but both of them graduated at the same time. My grandfather did, and he went to work for the Lackawanna Coal Company as an accountant. But he was very smart with figures. So my father tells me. I mean, he died a year after I was born. So I never really got to see him. But shortly after he was here, then right down here in the little town of Mayfield, he met my grandmother, Christine Winfield, and they were married. So she was from Winfield and he was from Jermyn. So they lived here up to that period of time. Then, my Aunt Alta, my grandfather's sister, married into the Bell family. Anybody know the Bells? Well, she married into the Bell family. She married Frank Bell. And then they had 4 children. One of them died. But you probably heard of Donald Bell. Anybody ever hear of Donald Bell? Well, Donald Bell was born and raised here in Jermyn. Then he left Jermyn, and during World War II, he went into the Flying Tigers. You ever hear of the Flying Tigers? So he went into the Flying Tigers, and he stayed there until the Flying Tigers left China. And he stayed in the service for a number of years. And then he retired, some big officer, I forget what it is, but he's buried right down there in the cemetery. But anyway, he became Ethel. She stayed here for a while, and she married a Beaumont Bell. Anybody hear of Beaumont Bell? Well, the Bell families were pretty popular here. They all came from Scott Township. John Bell came from Scott Township. Ruth Bell, Frank's mother, also came from Scott Township, but her maiden name was Brown. And she came from the Brown family from Scott Township. So all the Bells lived here for a long time. As a matter of fact, the last one I know of leaving this area was a Beaumont Bell, and that was in 1968. So they lived here for all these years, and they lived on Maple Street. Anybody know where Maple Street is? Now they lived on Maple Street. They lived there for a good many years, all of them. Ruth, Bell, all the Bells lived there on that street. And then of course my grandfather and them lived on Bacon Street until the time came when after him and my grandmother Christine married, they went to Dunmore. And that's where they lived. That's where my father was born, in Dunmore. Well, my father always told me about Jermyn and how they were here. The thing about it was, you know, Henry came here. He worked in a powder mill. Lillian, my grandmother, my great grandmother, you know, she stayed here. Henry died 1912, and she died shortly after him in 1912. I guess she loved him so much she couldn't bear the thought of being without. So she passed on shortly after he did. But then my grandfather had never come back. But if you get down to the Jermyn cemetery now, you'll go down there and you'll find the Myers plot, and you'll see where they're all buried. And the funny thing about it was, my father never knew anything about his grandfather, his grandmother. He didn't know nothing about it. My mother, she knew one person. She kept telling me about Hattie. I couldn't figure out what Hattie was till I found out that Hattie was the daughter they had. She only lived to be 3 years old when she died. Because when I went down the graveyard down there, the gentleman that took me to the graveyard told me that my grandfather George Myers, who died the year after I was born, he lived in Binghamton, New York, or was living in Binghamton. And anyway, he told me that they brought his body down here and buried him in the Myers plot there, and that this baby girl was buried on top of him. So I assumed from the time that Hattie was born and the time that she died, that's where she was buried, on top of him. So it's one of those things you don't realize, but you know, so did the Civil War really have an effect on these families? Of course it did. And then, you know, it even had a bigger, you know, they weren't the only family that suffered. There was a lot of them suffered. But it was the kind of things that happened to you during a war that nobody ever thinks about what happens or goes on the home front. Well, the home front was very important. But the other thing is that what happened to a soldier when he come home? What took place when a soldier come home? Well, a lot of times the soldiers suffered worse coming home. As a matter of fact, many of them would rather just go back and do what they were doing to come home. You know, that was like Bruce said about what they did. Well, most soldiers too had another problem, and it was whiskey. And they had sutlers that traveled along with the regiments and the battalions and the corps or whatever it might be, that they could go and they could buy it. And that sometimes that would happen to their money. When you realize a soldier don't get paid for 3 or 4 months, and then all of a sudden he gets money in his pocket, the first thing he does is go to the sutler. Why did he go to the sutler? Well, because he might owe him. He might owe him for food, he might owe him for some piece of clothing, or he might owe him for some other little thing. And then he may owe him for the whiskey he got. So now, instead of him sending home, you know, the $26 that he got paid and he should have sent home, now maybe he can only got half of it. So yeah, that's another big problem they had to face, you know, but they somehow managed to get through it, you know. But there's a lot of soldiers that come from the area you don't realize. I bet you there's a lot of you sitting here right now that probably had Civil War veterans in your family, you don't even know it. You think so? Would you think maybe you had somebody? Of course you do. And the thing, another funny thing about it is when you really get into genealogy and you really get looking, let me tell you something. When I graduated from school, I joined the Air Force and I went down south. I was stationed down there at an Air Force base. So while I was there, I spent 10 years in the Air Force. So the last 4 years of my Air Force career, and I stayed the last 4 years for one purpose, and that was to go to college. So while I was going to college, I got interested in history. So I started reading about the Civil War. And that's when it dawned on me. Gee, I'm wondering, I got somebody in my family that was in the Civil War? I mean, after all, we did come from a big family. You know, maybe we did. Well, the trouble is, I come home and I asked my father, I don't know nothing. I don't even know who my grandfather was. He didn't know anything. The only thing he knew about was where Myers Mountain was. Anybody know about Myers Mountain? That's the only thing he knew. You know where Myers Mountain is? How can you live here in this area and you don't know where Myers Mountain is? You know where Cary Mountain is? No. Well, if you get yourself a topographic map, when you look in there, you can see Myers Mountain, Cary Mountain, and you'll see they're there. That's the reason why it's Myers Mountain is because that's where my grandfather's farm was, and he owned 1,000 acres. And some of the acres were way up into the mountain. So I guess they named it Myers Mountain. The only problem is they spelled his name wrong. Well, that kind of aggravates me when people spell my name wrong. You know, I don't like it when they put an E between the M and a Y. That upsets me. But there was a time when the name did have an E, you know. But anyway, you just think about that. So it surprised me. And here you are, right here in Jermyn. You don't know there's a Myers Mountain. Jim, Did you ever hear of Carey's Mountain?
My ancestors.
There you go. Well, there's one.
Scott Township.
See, there you go. See, it makes the meeting worthwhile. You got one person that knows something. That's great. But then there's other things, you know, I mean, when you really think about it, you look around, you start going back in history, you start thinking about it, and you ask yourself, why did these people leave there and come here? Why did they come to Jermyn? Why did they come to Jessup? Or why did they come from Mayfield? Well, the whole thing is, people got tired of being dumb and stupid. And they wanted to make something of their lives. You know, maybe my grandmother up there was tired of trying to scratch a little bit of garden out of a patch of dirt and decided, well, you know, we can do better than this. So they come into the city, so they did, and so they got better jobs. So people out there who were farmers, you know, you got to realize one thing. You know, I gave Jeff a book a while ago. It's the whole census of Scott Township, and I want you to look at that census. You know, sometimes we go to the census, we don't pay much attention to it. But the thing is, if you really pay attention to it, you can really see the hardship of the family. How about this? How about when you look at a sentence, you find in the census, and you look in there and you see a family. Now you know the family got a daughter, right? So then you say to yourself, you look at another year, where's the daughter got? Now somewhere when you read along that sentence, in that census, you run up on it. Here's a little child, she's being some servant girl for somebody in their family. Or she's there cleaning the house. Just think of that. 5, 6, 7 years old. They did that back in the day. And they went to other places to live and to be servants. And some of the boys, or some of the smaller boys, they would go to farms and they would work at young ages. That's how come they wound up not being educated. They didn't go to school. Although they had a school there, people weren't going to school. So now what happens is now as they grow older, some of them start getting smart. Let's move into the bigger cities where we can get an education, where we can find a good job, where we don't have to break our backs. So they do. Of course, a lot of them came here, some of them went miners, like my Uncle Hiram, for instance. He came here and he was a miner. He was only 17 years old, he was working in the mines here. So the thing about it is, this is the kind of things that happened, but they started moving out because there wasn't nothing there for them no more. They had to get out. They had to get out and get educated. My grandfather, Henry Myers, wasn't educated. He couldn't hardly read or write. So the thing is, he wanted his son George to be able to read and write. He wanted his daughter to be able to read and write. So they come to a place where they could. That's why they went to the Jermyn High School and graduated in 1899. So the thing about it is that's what happened to people. They start moving out, coming into the cities. That's how we got here. That's how we know about these things. Some of them stayed there. Some of them families stayed there. You take the Whitlock family. They went up there in the same place for years and years and years and never moved. You know, but they do have modern appliances and things now, but they like where to live, but there were some people who just got tired. You know? And, you know, the thing about it is that some of the people probably thought to themselves, I hope someday somebody will write about me and tell me what I went through in my lifetime. You know? We've had family that's gone over the Oregon Trail. I could tell you horror stories about that. And let me tell you something, it's not like watching Wagon Train on TV. It's all I get to do. It was horrible. What they suffered, what they went through, the different places they suffered, everything they suffered, it was terrible. To be on that Oregon Trail, you didn't take baths for a week. You had a hard time finding, you had to put up an Indian tax. There was everything that happened to you. You had sometimes to get rid of all your goods because you couldn't carry them on the wagons no more. And if anybody in this late day and age went and you looked at the Oregon Trail, you know what you'd see? Great big ruts cut in a road. Did you believe it? Those wagon after wagon went through the, but just think about that. And I had family, he had family. They went over the Oregon Trail, they went out to the Fort Bridger. When they got to Fort Bridger, they went to Utah and became Latter-day Saints. Believe it or not. But the thing about it is when you start reading about it, so you look at Wagon Train on TV, yeah, you see these women all made up with their nice eyelashes and lipstick and all the nice dresses. That ain't the way it was. It was nothing like that. Same way when a man left here, you know, a man joined the army to go into the Civil War. Some thought it was romantic. Some thought it would be a good thing to do. Some men thought to themselves, you know, I need to do this, you know, because it's right. Okay, it was. But the thing about it is that once they got there, it wasn't romantic no more. You know, then there was I had no doubt there must have been 17-year-old and 18-year-old boys, and many of them lost their lives. Probably sat down and cried, and just wishing they could go home and see their mother. And you know, in all of my reading, in my 55 years of studying about the Civil War, that's the one thing that always struck me the most is when I'd be reading how man, when he was dying, would always say, tell my mother I died with my face to the enemy. Tell my mother I didn't turn my back. Tell my mother I love her. Tell my father this. Never say anything other than that. Was always to get a message home that let them know that they, no matter what happened to them, those things meant to them. Because the mother would say to them, when you go, remember, you do it honorably. And always remember your God. And always remember where you came from. And that's everything those boys carried into them when they went into battle. But some of them suffered terribly. And you think about this. You're an 18-year-old boy. You go in and you join the service on the 1st of May. And on the 30th of May you're dead. Well, this is what the country faced back in 1864 and 1865. You realize, you probably don't know what they are, but I'll tell you anyway. General U.S. Grant was a good general. Abraham Lincoln went through a number of idiots, making them generals in the army. And they were idiots, you know. And the thing about it is that they weren't accomplishing anything. They weren't doing nothing. The war was just dragging on. So now he says to himself, hey, I'm going to get Grant out there in the West and bring him east and make him my general of the armies. Somebody said, well, he's a drunk. He said, I don't care. I'll buy him a whole barrel of whiskey if we win the war. Well, he brings him east. So Grant takes over. But there's one thing that Grant did. He told Lincoln, he said, well, if I'm going to do this, it's going to be my way, and you've got to keep your mouth shut and leave me alone. He said, I don't want to see you unless I have to. Don't bother me. So what? Grant goes ahead. So he becomes a major general and make him general of the armies, and off he goes. So that first battle was May 5th, 1864 in the Wilderness. So now Grant's going to beat Robert E. Lee. He's going to drive him into the ground. Before you know, Robert E. Lee will be surrendering. Great. That's what we're looking for. That's exactly what we want. Oh, Lincoln was happy as a lark. Till the casualty list started coming in. Wilderness, 15,000 casualties. Spotsylvania, 15,000 casualties. North End, 7,000 and 8,000 casualties. And you're going to remember, the majority of these casualties now are between the ages of 18 and 21. And some of them only been in the service for a month. So you just think about that. That's pretty sad. So now he does that, and he keeps doing it. Month after month, June the 3rd, 1864, Cold Harbor, 6,000 men just like that shot down. Robert E. Lee called it murder. And it was murder. But Grant had the resources. He could do it. So if he lost 15,000 men today, he'd have 15,000 men tomorrow. Robert E. Lee, of 15,000 men today, he could only maybe get a handful of men tomorrow. And that's what Grant wanted. He wore them down. He kept wearing them down. But the fact of the matter, at a cost. So by the time he went between the Wilderness and the James River, he lost 70,000 men. And when you start looking at those rosters and you start seeing the men that died, and you start thinking about it. And these are the kind of things that I know that my poor grandmother did. When she realized she had 2 sons go off to war, and then another one go shortly after. Fortunately for my Uncle John, he didn't go till February 1865, and by then the war was just about over. So the fact is, he didn't suffer the way a lot of them suffered. But the fact of the matter is, you just think about that. 70,000 men in just those many battles. And there's still an end war. Now he goes from there to James River, he goes up, and now he gets bogged down in Petersburg. Now we've got a siege for 9 months. More and more lives. But they're not just dying from gunshot wounds. Did you know in the Civil War there was more men dying from disease than bullet wounds? Or being killed? It was the diseases. The water they had to drink. Cholera. Typhoid. All these other things. All these diseases they died from. It wasn't somebody shooting them down. So even that, had to have an effect on the men that were fighting. So you think about that. If I was 18 years old, I don't know. You know, I spent 10 years in the Air Force and I spent 16 years in the Army. Thank God I never had to draw my sights to kill somebody. And I always thank that. And if you think for 1 minute there wasn't a time when I was scared, oh yeah, there was during the Cold War. You know, I was in the bomber outfit. I flew an air tanker in the air, fueling bombers in the air. Those bombers stay up there 24 hours a day. And all you think to yourself is, boy, is one of those idiots over in Russia going to push a button and then we're in it? It's all they got to do, push a button, we're done. Next thing you know, we have a nuclear war all over the place. You think you don't think about it? Yeah, you think about it every day. When you're up there refueling that bomb, you ask yourself, where's he going? You know, anybody would drop a bomb, I'm up in the air, I wouldn't feel it up here, how would I know? Maybe I get home and the place is flat and there ain't nothing there. So you think about it. So those men back during the Civil War, they thought about it. Bruce brought some things in here, you know, you look at it. The most feared weapon that a man fought that feared in the Civil War was a bayonet. The bayonet was the most feared word because you could get stabbed with that and you're done for. And I'll tell you a little story about that.
And this one doesn't even have a point. They have points on them.
That's right. And then the thing about it is, I've read many stories, and there was a man, he was down at Little Round Top in Gettysburg. And these were the Confederates were after Chamberlain and his 20th Maine, and they were trying to take over Little Round Top. So there was a man that came running up, and he was going to shoot Colonel Oates with the 15th Alabama. And Oates stepped aside, and this guy behind him, one of his men, stuck the bayonet, hit him in the forehead, and come clean out the back of his head. That's how bad a bayonet was, and that's why it was one of the most feared weapons of the Civil War. Nobody wanted to get stuck with that bayonet. But I will tell you a story about that. Somebody told me a little while ago, you had a guy here talking about the Revolutionary War, or George Washington.
That was me. That was me.
You talk about George Washington? Well, I'll tell you much. Well, this don't really have anything to do with George Washington, but about the Civil War. Me and Mark have a cousin. His name was Samuel Whitmore. He happened to be in the area when the battles were taken on between Lexington and Concord. So then when they started chasing some of these Sons of Liberty across the field, Samuel Whitmore had a farm there. Now Samuel Whitmore was one of those guys that he thought to himself, hey, ain't nobody gonna go crawling across my land like that. Who do they think they are? So he looks out his back door and he sees these redcoats. So he runs in, he gets 2 pistols, puts them in his belt, he grabs his rifle, and then out the door he grabs another rifle. So he sees these redcoats. So he gets mad, he gets aggravated. And he's hollering at them, get off my land. Well, the British troops ain't gonna do nothing right then because they thought this was a wacky civilian. Just let him go. And he was an old man. Then he picks up a rifle, he shoots, he kills a British soldier. Then he takes the other one and kills another British soldier. Then he takes pills and shoots a couple more. So now the British soldiers rush over on him. 3 or 4 of them stab him with bayonets all over. 2 of them shot him. And then they go off and they leave him. Well, that guy's dead, he's done for. Well, you know, Samuel Whitmore, he was 73 years old at the time he did all this. You know, they went out, they picked him up out of the yard, took him in, bandaged him up and everything. He lived to be 93 years old. Just a little story about the Revolutionary War. You know, you think, you know, about these things that, you know, you say to yourself, but the thing about it is, when I'm reading the story, and I'm thinking about this man getting stabbed with his bayonet, and the bayonets back in them days weren't any different than those bayonets that Bruce had showed you. They were sharp and they were terrible, and they did an awful lot of damage. But can you imagine being stabbed a number of times and then living through it? I couldn't. I couldn't do it to save my life. Couldn't do it at all. I couldn't imagine somebody coming toward me. And even today, bayonets are used all right. It's something they never done away with. They still haven't. You know? Well, I hate to tell you this, folks. I could stand here all day long and talk to you, but my cousin over here is getting nervous and he wants to play his traveling shoebox. So I I better get out of its way. Thank you. Do you have, anyone have any questions? Is there any questions you'd like to ask? Is there anything you'd like to ask that I can help you with? No? Oh, it's good. It's good to have a group that knows everything.
We don't know enough to ask questions.
There you go, Cousin. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna change out my program because of the time. I had a half-hour program, but I'm going to cut it. But let me just expound a little bit about Halloween. We're proud of our heritage, and Ruth is my sister. Our family was one of the first families here. And we're proud of our heritage going back to the Revolution. We've had relatives up to the present day in the service. And the one thing about the Myers family, when we were called to duty, we answered. And there were times we paid the price. My dad's brother, our Uncle Donald, the Edward Myers, contracted polio at the beginning of the Korean War. He's buried at Elmira, and we think about Milo. And then our great-great-grandmother's brother, Ezra Green, passed away as well. I'm big into music. Hal and me are dressed of the time. The music during the Civil War was so important, the morale. I'll just touch a little base on what I'm getting at here. We're going to do one song, and if anybody could guess, it's probably the most important song of all. But during the Civil War, music was important and morale on both sides of the conflict. When I've played music, I play music from the South. I like the Bonnie Blue Flag because it portrays how the state seceded. It is historically accurate. Dixie was written by a Northerner, Daniel Dakota Emmett. So many songs were written during the Civil War. One of the most prolific songwriters was George Frederick Root, who wrote over 39 songs for the Union war effort, and even though we're not singing it, the one song, The Battle Cry of Freedom, was written in 1862 in response to Lincoln's call for 300,000 more troops. Because in the beginning of the war, we know that they were for short-term enlistments, 9 months. Well, I have one great-great-grandfather's pictures here, Samuel Waitman, that served twice. And musicians during the Civil War, they had military bands for the regiments that could afford them. And there are some bands that play today that play like the Federal City Brass Band. You can get CDs, you can hear them online. They play on actual instruments of that time. And the musicians were soldiers first and musicians second. And a lot of times the musicians would bring back their instruments with them, and there are some instruments that are around today that were from that time. And music was so important, like I said, on both sides. You'd find songs written that were sung in parlors in the homes of America, here in Jermyn, Gibsonburg, Carbondale, Scranton, Clifford. And in the early days, you had one or two instruments. You had a piano, or you had the home entertainment center of the 1800s called a reed organ or a pump organ. And so many of these songs, and while the war was being fought, even songs of Stephen Collins Foster were being sung here, and Stephen Foster was from Pittsburgh. And he wrote, his songs were only written for 17 years. Oh, Susanna, old folks at home. And he wrote so many songs, and he died penniless. And he was only 38 years old at the time of his death. And so many different authors would write these songs. And these songs where the boy would come back, like Hal was saying, would he be sending out to war? Sometimes that song would be written on an experience. Some were written through about battles. The battle hymn of Battle Cry of Freedom was written by George Frederick Root. It was outside of the Battle Hymn of Republic. The Battle Cry of Freedom was ranked right up there equal to the Union troops. And as for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, interesting story about that, Julia Ward Howe, for you ladies, was a woman's activist. And in 1861, in November that year, they were guests in Washington, and they stayed at the Willard Hotel, and they went around the city viewing. The whole city of Washington was one big field hospital. In the rotunda of the Capitol, soldiers laying all over the place. Now picture this. Go down to Gettysburg. Every home, church, the courthouse, every building was a field hospital. And outside of those buildings, you were tossing arms and legs out the window. And every home was like that. Well, in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building was a field hospital. And Julia Ward Howe and her husband, as they rode around, observed this scene. Well, they heard these soldiers singing this tune, which is actually an old Methodist tune written in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they were singing these verses called John Brown's Body, because of John Brown that had the raid on Harper's Ferry. Well, John Brown's body lies a-moldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. They're listening, and these words are terrible. Somebody suggested to Julia Ward Howe, why don't you write something better than that? She's thinking about it. So, as the evening's falling, she could see outside of her room at the Willard Hotel, she could see all these Union encampments and the watchfires of 100 circling camps, as if they were building an altar to Almighty God. Well, these things are going through her mind. She goes to bed. And sometimes things are done by divine intervention on the spur of the moment. The Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, was like that, written in Philadelphia. And she's woken up in the middle of the night. Something wakes Julia Ward Howe up. And something came to her mind, these verses. And she's thinking about the scene. And all of a sudden, it comes to her. She starts writing them down. She grabs the stub of a pencil and she has a paper. And she starts scribbling. Mine eyes have seen the glory. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. And the beauty of the lilies. Christ was born across the sea. As they died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. He is trampling out the grapes of wrath. Where, he is sounding forth the trumpet. So anyway, she writes it down. So anyway, early 1862, the Atlantic Monthly news magazine, she decides maybe submit that to the thing. She sold that song for $5 to the Atlantic Monthly. The words, the tune, everything was perfect. Well, it starts finding its way into the Union regiments and finally goes to the ears of Abraham Lincoln, who immediately wept when he heard these words. This song was fire to the Union troops. I won't have us sing it, but I'll quickly play the battle cry of freedom so you can hear the tone of the battle cry, and then we'll go right into the battle hymn of the Republic. And the rest is history. I'm pretty sure we've all heard the Mormon Tabernacle Choir sing that. It was sung overseas on September 11, 2001, outside of Buckingham Palace, that they were aware of what happened here in 2001. And their military band over there was ever playing they stopped whatever they're playing, God Save the Queen or whatever it was. And what did they break out and playing over in England? The Battle Hymn of the Republic. 162 years have passed since Julia Ward wrote those words in Washington, D.C. But I don't know one person that doesn't feel something when they don't sing these words because of what they mean. For us that are Civil War descendants, it's something special because it's a part of our blood. But we're going to share those words. I'm not doing the program. I was going to give you Stephen Foster. I was going to play everything. But I think this led to this time when you want to just think about what they went through. think about those that passed away. At one time, they said 620,000. It is now estimated that between 1860, when John Brown was hung in Charlestown, Virginia. In 1865, those that witnessed, that were alive when John Brown was hung, in 1865, over 750,000 Americans would perish from the earth. And not to talk politics, but there's some people who are keeping the conflict going. We lost relatives in the war. People from Jermyn went into the service. For people like us, that conflict never ends because it's always being fought. But we think about these songs that are still with us. So I'm going to quickly put that on. Let me play the Battle Cry of Freedom because I want you to hear the song that George Frederick wrote. And look at the words of it while I'm playing that song, and then we'll lead right into the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And just sing from your heart and think about what was written at that time. I'll tell you an interesting story. In 1989, the Methodist Church was putting together a new hymnal. And, well, we like to be peace-loving people. They decided they were going to take out 2 hymns out of the hymnal that were sort of conflicted songs. They wanted to take out Onward Christian Soldiers and the Battle Hymn of the Republic because they thought you're too violent. And until they realized the songs were talking about fighting the devil. And the Methodist hymnal decided to keep the Battle Hymn of the Republic in. And a lot of the people that sing it, as they die to make men holy, they put in let us live to make men free. But if you go on the Methodist hymnal, would you believe it is still let us die to make men free? In the Civil War, there were more Methodists in the field than there were other faiths. Ulysses Grant was a Methodist, and John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, once made the remark, our people die very well. And it's a thing of conflict and a thing of faith, but it's also a part of humanity. A battle cry of freedom. So if you want to just follow along, I'm going to play the battle cry of freedom for you so you can hear what that sounds like. Freedom. Kind of exciting, isn't it? The Union forever, hurrah boys, hurrah. And I like the one verse that says, we are springing to the call for 300,000 miles, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll fill the vacant ranks with 1,000,000 freemen more. And you imagine that coupled with the Battle Hymn of the Republic, what they were going into battle with. That was fighting words. The Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I was thinking I'll play the chorus through as a lead-in. Why don't we do verse 1? Do verse 2, I've seen in the watchfires, and let's end it with that last verse. We'll cut out the third one for the time, but let's do verses 1, 2, and 4. We're okay, it was written by a northerner from Ohio. You know, an interesting story about Daniel Decatur Emmett. Just like Stephen Foster, Daniel Decatur Emmett served in the military, but like in the 1830s. During that time, like Stephen Foster, they were coming out with these minstrel shows. Now, some people would have a problem, but they would do the blackface like Al Jolson. And Daniel Decatur Emmett would do that. And, well, anyway, he tries his hand at songwriting. He comes up with this song because he thought, well, the South seems like a nice place. And sure enough, he wrote that. I only put the one verse in there. There's some weird verses. You could go online and type it out. I want to just, before we do that, I have over here some songbooks if you want to look through to see what original sheet music. One's a Stephen Foster, one's a Civil War. I also have between them that I got online years ago an actual songbook that was used at GAR posts back in the early 20th century. I have it in plastic, but some songs like the Battle Cry of Freedom, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a couple Stephen Foster songs are in there. And so you could see, if you want to open up the books, you could see what original sheet music was like. And did you know that Lincoln's favorite song was Dixie? And we got to remember that Lincoln was from Kentucky. Kentucky, like Maryland, was a border state. So he liked Dixie. And in fact, after the war was ended, you know, after the surrender, the crowd gathers outside the White House, and there's a military band, and what do you think that he requested the military band play? It was Dixie. Or, as Daniel had written it, I wish it was in Dixie's land. Well, anyway, I won't put it the way that Daniel Emmett put it, but he saw that the South had used it as an anthem. And in the way, not that he put it, he says, I'm darned if I wish now I had never written it, because he did not like it used. It was used to describe a place, and after the conflict, Daniel Emmett thought, I wish now I never did it. But it's history. It's a part of music. I personally like the tone, and it's great. It's upbeat, so, you know, I wish I was down south in the land of cotton, old times were there forgotten. And it's just great. Look away, Dixieland. It's a great tune, it's upbeat, and let's sing it. Okay. Let me just introduce this and we'll be ready to sing. I was talking to my cousin, Al, well, he's done more work on the family, that we actually, the Myerses, they're relatives of ours that moved down south. We have relatives on both sides of the conflict. And so I'm always mindful that no matter what side, they're still Americans. And it's important to remember that when you go places like Gettysburg, stand at the angle there, and just imagine 12,000 Confederates marching over the field. And they got so close that we returned fire with shot and canister, and when it was over and the smoke cleared, They were lying in pieces all over the field. That was somebody's son, that was somebody's brother, that was somebody's father. And it's just something to think about, that you wonder what it was like, and be glad we weren't there. But take time, be glad and proud of your heritage, be glad of who you are. And if you get the chance to visit these battlefields, see where great deeds once thought impossible to do were done. And it's important that we remember and preserve these places so we could teach our young people that these are important things to remember. Thank you.
I'm president of GAR in Scranton, the Grand Army of the Republican Museum and Library. We do a lot of programs like this, so anytime you'd like to have us back, we do many programs on Lincoln assassination, the Skipiders, the battles, the Minden battles, what that was like to come home. So anytime you'd like us to come back, just let me know. I'll be glad to come anytime.
Okay, thank you.
Down in the Jermyn Cemetery, if you go down into the far bottom part of the cemetery, you'll see some graves down there that are from the Civil War. I think there's 4 or 5 of them at least down there. We just had a program at our Mason meeting, and Ray did a program on the brother to brother in Gettysburg, which is a thing about a general who one on the north and one on the south, and one was shot in battle, and because they were both Masons, they took care of each other. My grandson's 14 in 8th grade. He had to do a program, just finished it up this week, a video on the Civil War. So, sitting there and thinking about this, I said he should have came here. He could have filmed this and just turned it in. He wouldn't have had to do all the work that he did. We talk about the Civil War, and a lot of people don't know about the Massachusetts Black Regiment that fought in the Civil War.
54th Mass.
They were all 54th Massachusetts. They were all slaves, former slaves that joined the Union Army and were led by a white officer. And they were almost all killed trying to take the fort down south.
Fort Wagner.
Fort Wagner. There's a lot of Civil War history, and we're going to try to run a bus trip to Gettysburg, probably around September, October, whenever we can. And it'll be a fundraiser for the Historical Society for, to go towards our museum. And when that museum is open, you'll find a lot of these books like this with the bullet on it. I'll pass this around. This is an actual Civil War bullet that's probably hit a tree or a rock or something and got smashed, but that's lead.
The next time I come, I'll bring you all some Civil War bullets. I got tons of them.
The books like this will be in our library, and this other one, Encyclopedia of the American Civil War. These books will be over there for you to look at. These were given to me by Eddie Vandervoort, who was a member of the Historical Society and can't get around here anymore. In fact, he autographed it and signed it to me. But these books will be in our library, and I'm gonna probably put almost every book that I have over there on history, and I have probably 40-50 books on the Civil War, probably 20 or 30 or 40 books on the Revolutionary War, probably 20 or 30 or 40 books on World War II. They'll all be in that library for everybody to see. Cody, do you have anything to add that you want to mention? Because Cody has a list of all the people that were in the Civil War.
At least 5 different separate, from the local newspapers, draft lists of people that served from Cardale all the way to Wilkes-Barre. And then on the laptop, I have a couple more. I also brought another day in that. There's an officer's sword over there that would have been carried either by an officer or someone in one of the bands, one of the younger members, just for a self-defense sword. There's a coin over there from a time period. And I have a different assortment of the bullets that were used at that time, percussion caps and
Okay. And then up here, there's a container with Civil War bullets. Some are Confederate, some are Union, some are from pistols, some are from rifles, some are plain, which were handmade. They didn't have any rings on them. And the coins that are in here, every coin that's in here is from the Civil War period, 1861 to 1865, including a Confederate $5 gold piece, which is counterfeit. It's not real. I couldn't afford the real one.
Well, all our money was counterfeit.
But there's everything from half dimes to pennies to nickels that are in here. We also have our meat sticks for sale. If anybody would like to purchase any, we have a 50-50 raffle. They're $1 a chance, 6 for $5 that Mary can either walk around with, pass out, or whatever. We'll draw one out of them. We have refreshments for you over here. Come up and take a look at all the pictures and whatever else you want. You can take a look at all this stuff. But when we get the building open, there'll be a section in the building on World War II, World War I, Civil War, Korean War, the Afghanistan War, everything that we can find. And we'll have a section just on that, and you'll find a lot of the Civil War stuff. We do have a picture in one of our books of Alice Grabowski's grandfather, who was in the Civil War. He has his picture in his uniform and everything. We have everything packed away to move over to the new building, so I couldn't dig it out and figure out where all the ladies put everything, because they put everything in boxes, and I don't know where it's all at, and I didn't want to rip it all apart again and get the mill mad at me. So we'll have those pictures over there. And
when we open the new place, and we'll sort of.
if you want to come and see the new building at any time, just stop by and come in and take a look at it, because it's starting to look more and more like we want it to look like. The building is now opened up to one big room, and the ceiling is where you can come in and see the beautiful ceiling that's there. And we're getting ready. We got sheetrock up on the walls now. We're getting ready to put the wood on the side walls where we can mount all our artifacts, and start redoing our glass cases and getting our glass cases ready to go in there and getting the floor done. So we're coming down to the wire. We're a little short on funds to finish it, so we're waiting on a grant from our state representative. We're going to sit down with him and try to figure out if the county will sponsor a grant for us, and if possible, we can get some funding through there or through our state senator Rosemary Brown, or both of them, because they're both going to try to work on it. And we also tried to get something through Matt Cartwright, our congressman. He's going to see if there's any federal money for us to help us out. And we have to do some cost estimates and write a grant. So once that's together, maybe we can finish the building. And I want to be open this year, but I don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But I'm pushing for trying to open it by the fall. With that being said, I want to thank everybody for coming out. We're going to try to do this every month. We're working on another deal. Had somebody else that did Civil War stuff for maybe next month, and if not, then I will do another presentation on George Washington. Only it will be George Washington from the time he entered the Revolutionary War until the end. It won't be, his life. We did the one on his life, and it was pretty boring because it was everything that happened in his life from the beginning to the end of when he went into the Revolutionary War. And there was a lot about him farming and all these things, and it wasn't really as interesting because it's everything that's written in a book. But the Revolutionary War, you'll learn more about the battles, you'll learn more about his generals, you'll learn more about the hardships that everybody went through, and hopefully you'll get a bit better insight into what really happened in that war. So with that being said, Mary and Ray will have the 50-50 if anybody wants to take chances. There's coffee, there's water, there's cupcakes over there. And if you have any questions about the Civil War, see Cody or Hal or Mark or myself, and feel free to look at everything. Thank you.